Single mom finds an elderly woman fallen on the street and helps her. But the next day, the old woman returns in a limo and announces something that shocks everyone. Rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The cracked pavement of the big city hurt the tired feet of the 30-year-old woman who was carrying heavy bags full of cheap products bought at the most distant farmer's market, where the prices were less cruel to her tight budget. The boy beside her held tightly to the hem of her worn skirt, his short steps struggling to keep up with the hurried pace of his mother, who needed to get home before night completely fell on those dangerous streets. Sweat ran down her forehead, despite the cold wind that heralded the arrival of winter, and her arms trembled under the weight of the groceries that would have to last the whole week with a lot of planning and no waste. That's when she saw the woman lying on the damp sidewalk. An elderly lady of about 60 was stretched out there, moaning softly in pain, while dozens of people hurried past without even looking down, as if that body were just another obstacle to be circumvented on the way home. The single mother felt her heart clench inside her chest, but her feet hesitated because she knew exactly how much time she would lose if she stopped to help. How much it would cost in extra fatigue, in a missed bus, in an additional walk with her already exhausted son hanging on her skirt. The fallen lady's clothes were surprisingly thin and elegant, completely out of place on that dirty sidewalk. A soft fabric coat that looked expensive, genuine leather shoes, a discreet but clearly quality handbag. The single mother looked around hoping that someone with more resources, more time, more means would stop to help that woman who obviously came from another world. But no one slowed down even for a second. The boy tugged at his mother's skirt and pointed to the lady with his big eyes full of innocent concern. The single mother closed her eyes for a moment, thought about the bus she needed to catch in 15 minutes, thought about the hour's walk she would have to make if she missed that transport, thought about the overdue electricity bill waiting for her at home. But when she opened her eyes again and saw that elderly woman abandoned on the cold ground, she simply couldn't go on. She put the bags on the floor and knelt beside the lady, holding her arm carefully while asking what had happened. The elderly lady's face was contorted with pain, and she explained with difficulty that she had tripped and fallen, that her leg hurt terribly and she couldn't get up on her own. The single mother put her arm around the woman's waist and with considerable effort helped her sit on the nearest park bench, her own muscles protesting under the extra weight after a full day of hard work. The elderly lady was breathing with difficulty, and the single mother offered her own bottle of water, the last she had, and that she planned to share with her son along the way. The woman drank gratefully, while the single mother examined her swollen ankle carefully, trying to remember the basic first aid she had learned years ago. The boy approached timidly and asked if the grandma was going to be okay, his small voice full of genuine concern. The elderly lady smiled weakly at the child and reached out to touch his face tenderly. She thanked the single mother repeatedly, saying that she didn't expect to find kindness in that cruel city, that she had lost faith in people after so long seeing only indifference and selfishness. The single mother just shook her head and said that anyone would do the same, although she knew perfectly well that this was not true, that she had passed by that same sidewalk dozens of times and seen other needy people being ignored exactly as that lady was being ignored minutes ago. When the woman's breathing finally normalized and the color returned to her face, she insisted that she could get home on her own, that she lived nearby and didn't want to bother her anymore. The single mother offered to accompany her, but the elderly lady refused with polite firmness, saying only that she had already taken too much time from someone who clearly had so many responsibilities of her own. Before getting up, however, the lady held the single mother's hands with surprising strength and looked deep into her eyes, murmuring a thank you that seemed to carry much more weight than the situation demanded, as if that moment meant something profound that the single mother couldn't fully understand. The single mother picked up her bags and her son's hand and followed her path, reaching the bus stop exactly when the last transport of the schedule disappeared around the corner. She sighed deeply, adjusted the purchases in her sore arms, and began the long walk home while the boy complained of fatigue. There was no regret in her heart, only the tired resignation of someone who is used to constant sacrifices, but also a small satisfaction for having done the right thing, even when it cost dearly. The next day she woke up before dawn as always, prepared a simple coffee with stale bread, dressed her son in clean but mended clothes, and took him to the small public school where he would stay until the end of the afternoon. Her day would be exactly the same as the others, cleaning 3 different houses in distant neighborhoods, carrying heavy buckets of water and cleaning products, scrubbing floors until her hands were red and cracked, listening to complaints from demanding employers who were never satisfied with anything, and in the end, receiving a miserable payment that barely covered the rent and basic food. The episode of the previous day was almost forgotten in the midst of the whirlwind of immediate concerns that consumed every second of her attention. She was thinking about the overdue electricity bill, the boys' school tuition that needed to be paid by the end of the week, the leaky sink that the landlord refused to fix, the boy's shoe that was torn and needed to be replaced urgently. There was no room in her mind to wonder about the elderly lady, or if she had arrived home safely. When she finally returned to her neighborhood at the end of that endless afternoon, with her feet throbbing with pain and her back burning, she saw something completely out of the ordinary. A black and shiny limousine was parked right in front of her small ground-floor apartment, a vehicle so absurdly luxurious that it seemed to have been transported from another universe to that street of peeling houses and broken sidewalks. Neighbors crowded at the windows and doors, whispering excitedly and pointing to the impossible car. The single mother felt a knot form in her stomach. Cars like that only appeared in that neighborhood when there were serious problems, when someone important came to collect debts or bring bad news. She squeezed her son's hand tightly and walked slowly towards her apartment, trying to imagine what kind of new catastrophe life was preparing for her. The door of the limousine opened, and the elderly lady from yesterday stepped out, but completely transformed. Her clothes were impeccable and visibly expensive. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she was accompanied by a tall man in a suit who was carrying a genuine leather briefcase. The single mother stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing, unable to connect that elegant and powerful figure with the vulnerable woman lying on the sidewalk just 24 hours ago. The elderly lady walked towards her with an enigmatic smile on her lips, and then in front of all the gaping neighbors, she announced in a loud and clear voice that the single mother had just become the new general manager of all her commercial properties scattered throughout the region, with a monthly salary equivalent to 10 years of her current job as a cleaner. The words echoed through the silent street like an impossible thunder. The single mother felt her legs weaken and needed to lean on the nearest post to avoid falling to the ground. That couldn't be real. It was certainly some kind of absurd misunderstanding or a cruel joke from someone too bored with their own life. She opened her mouth to protest, to explain that there had obviously been a grotesque mistake, but no sound came out of her throat. The man in the suit opened the leather briefcase and began to present official documents with stamps and signatures, contracts printed on letterhead, bank statements that displayed numbers with so many zeros that they seemed like secret codes instead of monetary values. The elderly lady explained calmly, as if she were commenting on the weather, that she owned a vast network of commercial establishments built over 4 decades of tireless work, including stores, restaurants, offices and small businesses spread throughout the metropolitan area. The single mother shook her head repeatedly, her eyes fixed on the documents she couldn't really read because the letters danced before her blurred vision. This didn't make any sense. Why would someone with so much wealth choose a cleaner with no formal education, no administrative experience, no absolutely anything that qualified her for a position of such responsibility? It had to be a mistake. It had to be. The elderly lady took a step forward and held the single mother's hands again, her voice soft but firm, cutting through the confusion. She explained that she had spent the last 6 months secretly testing people all over the city, faking situations of vulnerability in different places and times, watching how hundreds of individuals reacted to finding someone in need of help. The vast majority simply ignored, some even laughed, others looked away with obvious discomfort, and a few stopped only when there were enough witnesses to impress. The single mother had been the only person in all these months who stopped genuinely, who sacrificed her own well-being without hesitation, who offered her last water without expecting anything in return, whose son demonstrated the same natural compassion that can only come from an upbringing based on real values instead of empty words. The elderly lady needed someone with true integrity to trust her legacy because she was tired of greedy and dishonest administrators who almost destroyed everything she had built with so much sweat. The neighbors around exploded in contradictory comments. Some celebrated the unexpected luck with exaggerated enthusiasm, already planning how they could benefit from the neighbor's new position. Others murmured with poorly disguised envy that there was certainly something suspicious about it all, that no one gave anything for free in this world, that there were probably secret conditions that the poor wretch would still discover. An older woman commented loud enough to be heard that people like them never managed to get out of poverty because they didn't have the capacity for it, and that it would be fun to watch the inevitable failure. The single mother barely heard the hubbub around her. Her son tugged at her skirt, asking what was happening, why everyone was looking, if they were going to get new toys. She looked down and saw those trusting eyes that believed that the mother could do anything, solve any problem, and felt an overwhelming weight of responsibility settle on her already so tired shoulders. The elderly lady added that she would also provide adequate housing in a safe neighborhood, quality education in private school for the boy, and all the resources needed for her to perform the function with dignity. The man in the suit held out an expensive pen and indicated where she should sign the initial contracts, explaining in technical terms that she did not fully understand about trial period, conduct clauses, performance expectations. That night, after the limousine finally left, leaving a pile of documents on the old table of the tiny apartment, the single mother stayed awake until dawn, trying to process what had happened. She read and reread the contracts without understanding half of the legal terms, looked at the absurd numbers of the monthly salary that was written there in black ink on white paper, touched the new bank card that she had received as if it were made of crystal that could shatter at any moment. The fear was almost paralyzing. She knew absolutely nothing about business administration, had never managed even a small team, barely knew how to use a computer beyond the most basic functions. How could she live up to such a gigantic responsibility? How could she command people who certainly had much more education and experience? What would happen when everyone found out that she was just a cleaner pretending to be someone important? In the following days, she found herself immersed in a completely alien and terrifying world. Endless meetings with lawyers who spoke in incomprehensible technical language. Accountants who presented spreadsheets full of numbers and graphs that could be ancient hieroglyphs for the sense they made to her. Managers of the various establishments who looked at her with poorly disguised distrust and answered her questions with irritating condescension. A particularly arrogant middle-aged manager, responsible for the financial sector of the entire operation, made it clear from the first moment that he had no intention of respecting the authority of that unqualified woman. He called her madam, with a tone that turned the word into an insult, explained basic concepts with exaggerated slowness as if he were talking to an especially slow child, and sighed audibly every time she asked a question. The single mother swallowed the humiliation in silence because she didn't know how to react, because part of her agreed that she really didn't belong in that world, because she was afraid that any confrontation would reveal her incompetence and result in the immediate loss of that impossible opportunity. She spent the night studying handouts on administration that the elderly lady had provided, trying to memorize terms and concepts that slipped from her tired mind like water between her fingers. The son was confused by all the changes. They had moved to a small but comfortable house in an infinitely better neighborhood, with a backyard where he could play and his own room with new toys. But the child repeatedly asked when they were going back to their real home, if this was just a long visit, if his mother was still the same person. He threw tantrums he had never thrown before, refused to sleep alone in the new room, cried for insignificant reasons. The single mother divided herself between the increasingly demanding work and the need to pay attention to her son, who was clearly suffering. She hired a kind babysitter to take care of the boy while she was in the endless meetings, but the child cried every time she left, clinging to her legs and begging to come along. Guilt gnawed at her chest every time she closed the door, hearing those desperate sobs on the other side. The elderly lady, who insisted on being called just Ms. Businesswoman, followed everything with infinite patience, but also with observant eyes that didn't miss a detail. She explained the intricacies of the business, shared stories of her own experiences and mistakes, but also paid attention to how the single mother dealt with pressure, with disrespect, with temptations that inevitably arose when someone of humble origin assumed power over people accustomed to looking down on those they considered inferior. It was during a routine internal audit, 3 weeks after taking office, that the single mother discovered something disturbing. She was reviewing piles of financial documents that she still didn't fully understand when she noticed a strange pattern in the supplier invoices. Values that seemed too high, companies with names that were repeated but with slight variations, addresses that didn't make geographical sense. She took her concerns to Ms. Businesswoman, who immediately ordered a deeper investigation. What they discovered was shocking. The arrogant financial manager had been systematically embezzling funds for at least 3 years through an elaborate network of fraudulent contracts with ghost vendors. The amounts totaled a considerable fortune that had been methodically stolen from the assets that Ms. Businesswoman had built with so much sacrifice. The single mother felt nauseous as she realized the magnitude of the betrayal. But what made her even sicker was the decision that now weighed on her shoulders. Publicly denouncing that man would mean creating powerful enemies, influential people who would certainly retaliate in every possible way. Resolving everything discreetly would maintain peace, avoid scandal, protect the reputation of the businesses. All the experienced advisors recommended the silent path. The single mother spent the whole night sleepless, sitting in the kitchen of the new house that still didn't feel like hers, staring at the documents that proved the criminal scheme. All the experienced voices around her said the same thing. Be smart. Don't make enemies. Resolve this internally. Protect the company's image. It was the safe path, the path that smart people would choose. But every time she looked at those stolen numbers, she thought about the honest employees whose salaries could have been better, about the investments in improvements that were never made, about the betrayed trust. When the sun rose, she had already made her decision. Against all advice, against her own survival in that new and frightening world, she chose absolute transparency. She gathered irrefutable evidence, documented every suspicious transaction, and at the next meeting with all the managers publicly exposed the entire scheme, naming the financial manager and demanding his immediate dismissal along with a full lawsuit. The man turned livid with anger. He got up from his chair so forcefully that it fell backwards, pointed his finger at the single mother, and said that she had no idea of the colossal mistake she was making, that she was just an ignorant cleaner playing at being an administrator, that she would bitterly regret having messed with the wrong people. The veiled threat hung in the air like toxic smoke, and she felt her stomach churn with fear, but she kept her voice firm as she repeated that he was fired and that the authorities had already been notified. The consequences came quickly and brutally. In the following weeks, coordinated attacks began. Malicious rumors spread throughout the local business community about her supposed incompetence and emotional instability. Old clients began to cancel contracts, claiming loss of confidence in the new management. Suppliers who were previously punctual began to delay deliveries without plausible explanation. Employees loyal to the former manager created subtle obstacles in every process, making everything take twice as long as necessary. Even worse were the insinuations about her relationship with Ms. Businesswoman. Whispered comments in hallways suggested that there was something inappropriate in that dynamic, that no one gave so much power for free, that there were certainly shady favors being exchanged. The gossip reached the neighborhood where she lived, and even neighbors who previously greeted her began to look with strange and uncomfortable expressions. The son began to suffer at the new school. Children from more established families mocked him for being the poor boy, pretending to be rich, imitated his way of speaking, excluded him from the games. He came home crying almost every day, asking why the other children were mean, why they couldn't go back to the old school where he had real friends. The single mother felt her heart break every time she wiped away those tears, questioning if she had made a terrible mistake in accepting that opportunity that was destroying the peace of the only treasure she possessed. One night, the boy had a high fever that spiked frighteningly fast. She found him trembling violently in bed, his small body burning like embers, and panic took over all her senses. The babysitter called, suggesting to take him to the hospital, but the single mother dismissed the woman and held her son in her arms, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, singing softly the same simple song she used to sing in the cramped apartment, promising that everything would be all right, even when she wasn't sure of anything. That night, there was a crucial meeting scheduled with important investors who could inject significant resources into the business or withdraw support completely, depending on their impression of the new management. Everyone said that her presence was absolutely essential, that cancelling would be professional suicide, that she needed to prove that she was serious and committed. But when she looked at her son's flushed face with fever, when she felt his trembling body against hers, the decision was instantaneous and without regret. She cancelled the meeting and spent the whole night next to the boy's bed, monitoring his temperature every hour, offering water with infinite patience, whispering words of comfort that seemed to bring more relief than any medicine. In the morning, when the fever finally subsided and the child opened his eyes with a faint smile, she realized that she was crying not only with relief, but with complete emotional exhaustion. Sitting there on the floor next to the bed, with her back aching and her eyes burning with fatigue, she allowed herself to question everything for the first time since that madness began. Was all this suffering really worth it? Did the higher salary mean anything if her son was unhappy and she lived constantly distraught? Wouldn't it be better to go back to the simple life of before, where at least they knew exactly who they were and where they belonged? It was in this moment of complete vulnerability that Ms. Businesswoman appeared. She knocked gently on the door and came in, bringing homemade soup, made with her own hands, and natural remedies that she swore were miraculous. She sat on the floor next to the single mother without caring about her expensive clothes, and stayed there in supportive silence for long minutes, only offering presence without judgment. Finally, the elderly lady began to tell her own story. Decades ago, she was also a desperately poor single mother, working in degrading jobs just to keep her son fed and with a roof over his head. One day she fainted from hunger on the street, and a complete stranger not only helped her, but paid her overdue bills, bought enough food for 2 weeks, and returned for months afterwards bringing aid without ever revealing her name or asking for recognition. That inexplicable kindness not only saved her life, but inspired her to build something that would one day allow her to give back to the world what she had received. She worked like never before, saved every possible penny, invested small amounts in risky businesses that slowly began to prosper. For 40 years she built her wealth with sweat and tears, always with the mental promise that when the right moment came, she would find someone with the same essence of selfless kindness to perpetuate that cycle. That is why she tested hundreds of people for 6 months, creating increasingly elaborate situations of vulnerability, observing reactions, studying characters. When she finally found the single mother on that sidewalk, when she saw the hesitation followed by the firm decision to help, even if it cost dearly, when she realized that the son had been raised with the same values, she knew that her search had ended. The revelation brought a deep understanding that reconnected the single mother with her purpose. This wasn't about personal enrichment or empty social climbing. It was about honoring a legacy of kindness that had saved a life and now needed to continue saving others. The perspective changed everything, gave meaning to the suffering, justified the sacrifices. But the problems were far from over. The investigation of the fired financial manager revealed something even worse. He wasn't acting alone. 2 other important administrators were involved in different dishonest practices, diverting resources through parallel schemes that worked independently. The entire structure was more rotten than anyone had imagined. The single mother had to fire more people, face more threats, endure more public attacks on her reputation. The lawsuits filed by the fired managers alleged unfair persecution, discrimination, even moral harassment, and each new accusation was widely publicized by the local press, always eager for juicy scandals. Her photo appeared on news sites with sensationalist headlines that completely distorted the truth. There were days when she woke up without the strength to get out of bed. Days when she looked at her own reflection in the mirror and saw a tired, frightened stranger questioning every decision. The son asked why his mother was always sad now, why they didn't play any more like before, and each innocent question was a sharp blade, cutting his already so wounded heart. But gradually, small victories began to appear. Honest employees, who had remained silent for years for fear of retaliation, finally found the courage to speak, bringing valuable information and moral support. Some clients who had cancelled contracts returned discreetly after verifying that the rumors were unfounded. Reliable suppliers proved willing to maintain fair partnerships based on mutual respect. The single mother implemented changes that seemed small but meant worlds to those at the lowest levels of the hierarchy. Fairer wages, more humane hours, basic health benefits, adequate rest areas. She perfectly remembered what it was like to work to exhaustion for miserable pay, and she used that memory as a guide for every administrative decision. The son began to adapt when she established consistent routines that created bridges with his previous life. Dinner together every night without exception, even if it meant leaving important meetings, reading stories before bed exactly as they did in the small apartment, setting aside weekend mornings just for silly games with no agenda. The child needed that continuity to feel safe, and she would make any professional sacrifice necessary to ensure that. The following months brought a gradual but undeniable transformation. The local community began to realize that under the new management, the establishments were genuinely improving. The stores hired more residents of the region, giving opportunities to inexperienced young people and older people who had been discarded by the market. The wages paid were dignified, allowing entire families to improve their living conditions. Small social projects began to appear. Donations of unsold food to needy families, community spaces open for free events, professional training programs. The single mother didn't do this for public recognition or to build a positive image. She did it because she finally had the power to realize the dreams she had secretly nurtured during all those years of humiliation and poverty. When she cleaned luxurious mansions, imagining how she would use such resources if she ever had them. Each employee hired was someone she saw reflected in herself. Each fair salary was the dignity she herself so longed for. Each opportunity given was the chance that no one ever offered her. But not everything was victories. A powerful businessman in the region, owner of a competing network of establishments, began to be seriously bothered by that unexpected competition. His own businesses operated with dubious practices that had been indirectly exposed by the contrast with the ethical management of the single mother. His employees began to ask for better conditions. Customers questioned why he didn't offer the same social benefits. Tax authorities looked more closely at irregularities that previously went unnoticed. He decided to destroy that threat before it caused more damage to his reputation and profits. Using contacts in the local press, he orchestrated an aggressive smear campaign. Biased reports began to appear, questioning the origin of Ms. Businesswoman's assets, insinuating money laundering, suggesting that the single mother was just a front for criminal operations. Suppliers were pressured with veiled threats to break contracts, creating serious operational problems. The crisis reached devastating proportions quickly. Important clients cancelled large orders, citing concerns about reputation. New employees began to quit, fearing being associated with something illegal. Even neighbors who had celebrated her rise returned to looking with suspicion, whispering that they always knew there was something wrong with that whole story. The son went back to suffering at school with renewed taunts, now called the son of a criminal by the cruel classmates. The single mother faced the worst moment since it had all begun. Emergency meetings happened daily, trying to contain the damage. Lawyers drew up defensive strategies. Consultants suggested publicity counterattacks. But all those tactics seemed to only prolong the agony, fighting lies with more lies, sinking deeper and deeper into the mud instead of finding firm ground. That's when she made the riskiest decision of all. Against the unanimous opinion of all the experienced consultants, she chose absolute and radical transparency. She publicly announced that she would open all the accounting books for a complete, independent audit, invited the entire community to inspect every aspect of the operation, made unrestricted access available to financial documents from the last 5 years. If there was something wrong, let it be discovered and corrected. If it was clean, the truth would prove itself. The consultant said she was committing professional suicide. Even honest operations had small irregularities that auditors always found, and any minimal failure would be amplified by the enemies as proof of guilt. But the single mother was tired of living in fear, tired of defending herself from lies, tired of playing a game whose rules were written by dishonest people. She would bet everything on the truth because it was the only thing she really possessed. The audit was conducted by a respected and rigorous firm that owed favors to no one. For 3 agonizing weeks, auditors scoured every transaction, every contract, every receipt. The single mother continued working normally during this time, refusing to show nervousness even when her stomach churned constantly. Employees were tense, clients hesitant. Even Ms. Businesswoman showed visible concern that perhaps she had put too good a person in too cruel a world. The son asked one night if they were going to be poor again. He said he didn't mind living in the small apartment as long as his mother stopped being sad all the time. The single mother hugged that small and warm body against her chest and promised that no matter what happened, they would always have each other, and that was more valuable than any fortune. When the final audit report was released publicly, the result was devastating for the enemies. Not only did it confirm total cleanliness in the current management, but it also meticulously documented all the embezzlement schemes that had been discovered and corrected, proving that the new administration had actually saved the assets from a systematic corruption that had been going on for years. More than that, the audit accidentally exposed serious irregularities in the accounting of the rival businessman who had orchestrated the entire smear campaign. The tax authorities who followed the process redirected their attention to that man who so much accused others. Investigations were opened, documents were seized, and in a matter of weeks, he was facing serious lawsuits for tax evasion and fraud. The irony was cruel. By trying to destroy someone upright, he had drawn attention to his own dishonesty. The reputation of the single mother not only recovered, but solidified as an example of ethical leadership in a region accustomed to dubious practices. Positive reports began to appear telling her real story, how a cleaner had taken over a commercial empire and was transforming it through simple but powerful values. Other entrepreneurs began discreetly to improve their own practices, realizing that that new standard was changing the expectations of the market. But the greatest transformation happened internally. Ms. Businesswoman, whose health had been deteriorating gradually over those months, finally revealed the full diagnosis that she had hidden from everyone. She was facing a serious condition that severely limited the time she had left, and that entire accelerated process of transferring responsibilities had been motivated by the urgency to ensure that her legacy continued in reliable hands before it was too late. The revelation brought tears, but not of despair. The elderly lady said that she could leave in peace now, knowing that 40 years of honest work would continue to benefit the community through someone who truly understood the purpose behind those assets. She had tested hundreds of people precisely because she couldn't afford to err in that final and crucial choice. The single mother held the hands of that extraordinary woman and promised to honor that trust until her last breath. In the following months, she built a solid team of people who shared the same values, delegating responsibilities in an intelligent way that allowed her to devote adequate time to her son, who was now happy, safe, and proud of his mother. The boy created a tradition of visiting Miss Businesswoman every week, bringing drawings he made especially for her, telling stories from school, making her laugh with his enchanting innocence. The elderly lady said that those visits were her most powerful medicine, reminding her that genuine kindness still existed in the world and that it was worth having fought so hard to perpetuate it. The local community gradually changed its complete perception. What began as envy and distrust transformed into respect and even admiration. People who had spread malicious rumors now apologized shamefully. Neighbors who turned their backs came back offering genuine support. The whole neighborhood seemed to have learned something about judging appearances and giving chances to those who really deserve it. 1 year after that day on the damp sidewalk, the single mother looked out the window of her simple but comfortable office, observing the movement in the streets. She didn't live in a mansion or drive luxury cars, choosing to maintain a modest life that connected her with her roots. The generous salary was invested in her son's education, in improvements for the businesses that benefited employees, in social projects that helped families like hers had been. She learned that true wealth was not in accumulating assets, but in using resources to multiply kindness. Each employee hired, each fair salary paid, each family helped was part of an infinite cycle initiated decades ago by a generous stranger who saved a desperate single mother, who in turn built an empire to reciprocate, who finally found someone to continue that mission. The son ran into the office, showing a school essay about heroines, where he had written that his mother was the bravest person in the world because she chose to be good even when it was difficult. The single mother embraced that gift more precious than any fortune, and knew that every tear shed, every sleepless night, every moment of paralyzing fear had been absolutely worth it. That night, while reading stories to her son before bed as they always had, she realized that she had finally found peace, not because she had money or position, but because she was living with purpose, honoring a legacy of kindness, raising a son who understood that true value is in character. Life would still bring challenges, it always would, but she would face each one knowing exactly who she was and what she stood for, and that made all the difference. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.